Welcome. As you settle in for rest tonight, allow your thoughts to drift away from the modern world, to the distant echoes of marble columns, tiled rooftops, and the warm stone streets of ancient Rome. But rather than dwell on the grandeur of emperors or the pomp of palaces, we will journey down the side alleys past bustling taverns, into shaded courtyards, and up the creaking stairs of crowded Roman apartments, where most of the empire's city dwellers actually lived. Tonight's journey is not one of triumphal arches or thunderous legions, but of everyday endurance. Under wooden beams, behind cracked plaster, in dwellings stacked high like precarious loaves of bread. We'll begin with the uncomfortable reality of daily life in a Roman apartment block. It's known as an insolent Y. Frankly, it was no place for peaceful rest. Then, we'll explore the towering ambition and ultimate fall of Emperor Nero, whose obsession with legacy helped reshape the city's architecture. We'll descend into the fascinating mysteries of underground Roman catacombs and sealed chambers still being discovered. Finally, we'll ascend once more, this time not into the upper floors of a creaky insula, but into the marbled lives of Rome's elite to see how very differently they lived and dreamed. So find a comfortable position, let your eyes grow heavy, and prepare to wander calmly through the quieter corners of history. Imagine yourself standing at the base of a tall, shadowed building, its surface a patchwork of crumbling bricks, stucco smudges, and laundry flapping gently in the breeze. This is not some modern tenement. This is an insula, one of the many ancient Roman apartment blocks that loomed over the narrow lanes of the city, like a stack of firewood, densely packed, oddly shaped, and always on the verge of tipping. From the street, you might look up and see 4, 5, even 6 stories each, one smaller than the last, like slices of a worn loaf stacked too high. Wooden balconies creak under the weight of amphory linens and sometimes children. Pigeons nest along the edges. From an open window, you might hear the muffled sound of coughing or the distant slosh of someone drawing water from a jug, not a tap. Live in an insula was to live in close company, too close, often with heat, noise, and constant risk. These buildings were made mostly of concrete and brick, but their upper stories, usually the cheapest, were often constructed with timber, which made them dangerously flammable. Fires were a common terror in Rome, spreading quickly through neighborhoods where buildings were jammed together, and alleyways offered little escape. And yet, this was how the majority of Romans in the city lived. The poor, the working class, even some modest merchants. The wealthier you were, the closer to the ground you stayed, quite literally. The ground floor often held shops or small workshops, sometimes bakeries or taverns, known as thermopolia, where hot food was sold. Just above that might live a shopkeeper's family, enjoying slightly sturdier walls and easier access to the street. But climb higher and you'll find cramped, stifling spaces. Small rooms with few windows, sometimes only a door to a hallway, no plumbing, no insulation. If you wanted water, you'd have to carry it up yourself, often several flights drawn from a public fountain down the road. Waste, meanwhile, had no easy exit. There were no modern pipes or flush systems. Chamber pots were common, and it wasn't unheard of for contents to be dumped from windows, hence the overhanging eaves designed, in part, to offer some meager protection. In winter, the stone held the cold like a cave. In summer, the heat collected beneath the roof tiles, turning rooms into stifling ovens. Some would sleep on rooftops during hotter nights, hoping for a breeze. Others would simply sweat in silence, the air thick with cooking smoke, human breath, and the faint tang of amphory filled with fish sauce or garum. The noise was constant. The clop of hooves on the stone road below, the shouts of merchants, the wail of infants, and the clang of bronze pots echoing from open windows. With thin walls and shared spaces, privacy was a concept, not a reality. Work followed people home. Cobbler might hammer leather late into the evening in his upstairs chamber. Seamstress might stitch by candlelight until her fingers cramped. Labor and life were one and the same, bound together by necessity. And there was little respite. Laws even regulated how high these buildings could be, eventually limiting them to around 70 Roman feet, but enforcement was irregular. And many insulae simply grew taller until collapse or fire brought them down. Even the term insula, which literally means island, carries a quiet irony. These were not places of solitude or safety. They were crowded, loud, and sometimes deadly. And yet they were home to hundreds of thousands. It's worth pausing in this moment to imagine what it would feel like to end your day in one of these rooms. You've climbed 5 stories after hauling jugs of water. The light has dimmed to a flickering oil lamp. Your bed is a thin mat on a timber floor. Above you, a ceiling made of reeds and plaster might creak with every step your upstairs neighbor takes. You can hear muffled voices, someone arguing, someone snoring, someone softly humming to themselves. There is no breeze. There is no bath. There is only the soft weight of exhaustion and the quiet dread that if fire breaks out tonight, you may have only moments to escape down narrow stairs already filled with neighbors. Still, sleep comes, eventually. It always does. And in the morning, the city will stir once again. The bread ovens will warm, the carts will roll, and the great machine of Rome will continue, powered not by emperors or generals, but by those who live stacked above one another, scraping a life from dust and stone. Now, from the creaking rafters of insula life, let us turn our gaze upward, not to the top floor, but far beyond. To the imperial palaces perched on the Palatine Hill, where one man once believed the city should be reshaped in his image. That man was Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known simply as Nero. To most, his name evokes madness, cruelty, even the image possibly exaggerated of a man playing music while the Capitol burned. But tonight, let's take a gentler step through the smoke and marble, and trace Nero not just as a tyrant, but as an ambitious and flawed human being. Caught in the strange machinery of power and legacy, imagine a world where the empire is vast, but the young emperor feels small within it. Nero came to power at just 16 years old, thanks in part to his powerful mother, Agrippina. She had married the Emperor Claudius and secured Nero's adoption and succession, perhaps through a blend of careful politicking and, if rumors are true, a well-timed poisoning. At first, Nero was not the monster many feared. He cut taxes, banned bloodshed from gladiator shows, even gave public performances playing the lyre, reciting poetry. He wanted to be adored not just as a ruler, but as an artist, as someone who shaped not only law, but beauty. But power in Rome was rarely kind, and Nero's grip grew tighter with time. He became suspicious of threats, both real and imagined. His mother, once his greatest champion, was eventually seen as a rival, and in time, he ordered her death. The story goes that she survived a staged shipwreck meant to kill her, so he tried again more directly. Many of his advisors and family members met similar fates. Even his wife Poppaea reportedly died from a violent encounter. And though the exact truth is lost in the layers of time and propaganda, the pattern was clear. Nero grew more isolated, more erratic, more theatrical. Then came the fire. In the year 64 CE, a blaze broke out in the shops near the Circus Maximus. The dry wood and narrow alleys fed the flames. The city burned for days. Hundreds of structures collapsed: homes, temples, storehouses. People fled with whatever they could carry. Many did not escape. The question of how the fire started remains unanswered. Some blamed carelessness, others hinted at sabotage. But popular rumor pointed to Nero himself, that he deset the fire to clear land for his grand architectural vision, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. And whether or not he struck the first spark, Nero certainly did build. On the ruins of the destroyed quarters, he began constructing an enormous palace-lavish gardens, rotating dining halls, even artificial lakes. It was not just a home, it was a statement that from ash Rome could be reborn under his artistic eye. It is this moment that has become legend. Nero watching the flames, playing music, perhaps a lyre, perhaps a flute. The ancient historian Suetonius tells it as if fact, though others suggest he wasn't even in Rome at the time. But the imagery has endured. Fire and fiddle, destruction and detachment. Public opinion turned sharply. Nero, sensing the danger, needed a scapegoat and found it in the early Christian community, still small and mostly misunderstood. Many were arrested, tortured, and executed. In punishing the innocent, Nero further cemented his reputation for cruelty. His later years were marked by paranoia. He fled Rome for the provinces, performed as a singer in Greek theaters, imagined himself a cultural savior more than a political one. But back in Rome, patience had worn thin. Conspiracy of generals and senators formed. As rebellion stirred and his support crumbled, Nero fled. And in 68 CE, facing capture, he took his own life. His final words reportedly were, "What an artist dies in me." He was the last of the Julio-Claudian line. In his wake, civil war broke out. Rome burned again, not from one man's flame, but from a scramble for power in a world now leaderless. Still, his legacy lingers not in songs or statues, but in ruins. The Golden House, once a sprawling marvel, was buried beneath later buildings. On its foundations rose the Colosseum, perhaps the most famous structure in all of Rome. Nero's ashes were scattered, his memory officially condemned. But some people, even decades later, whispered of his return. A strange hope or fear that he might reappear. The so-called Nero Redivivus legend. Such is the paradox of legacy. One man's ambition can outlast the very empire it sought to glorify. Now, as you breathe in deeply, imagine the flicker of firelight against crumbling columns. Not the roar of chaos, but the soft crackle of time. The city sleeps now, as even its emperors must. And in the cool hush of the ancient night, we drift from Nero's ashes. To the secrets still buried far below, let us now descend, not metaphorically, but quite literally down into the underbelly of the eternal city. Beneath the paving stones, beneath the apartments and avenues and ancient markets, lies another Rome. A darker one, a quieter one. This is the world of hidden tombs, secret vaults, forgotten temples, and silent corridors, carved long ago and left to time. It begins with the catacombs' long, narrow tunnels etched into the soft volcanic tuff beneath the city, running for miles beneath the surface. These catacombs were used for centuries, primarily by early Christians and Jews, who buried their dead in niches stacked like bookshelves, sometimes 3 or 4 high. Candles flickered here. Whispered prayers echoed off the walls. The air was close, cool, and thick with the scent of earth and limestone. Many of these underground cemeteries remained undiscovered for centuries. Even today, only a fraction of them have been fully mapped. The catacombs of San Sebastiano, San Callisto, and Priscilla are among the most famous. But there are more. Perhaps dozens more, their entrances sealed, forgotten, or buried beneath later construction, and they are not empty. Some contain frescoes still vivid after 1,700 years, simple symbols like fish and anchors, or elaborate paintings of banquets, shepherds, and martyrdom. There are inscriptions scratched into plaster, prayers in Latin and Greek, and carvings of doves and olive branches. But also blank spaces, sealed chambers with no known key, tombs without names, and corridors that curve away into darkness, too unstable or too sacred to excavate. Beyond the catacombs lie deeper mysteries, those of Rome's subterranean temples, known as Mithraea. These were small, dim sanctuaries dedicated to Mithras, a god of Persian origin whose cult became popular among Roman soldiers. Mithras was often depicted slaying a cosmic bull, surrounded by stars, torchbearers, and astrological symbols. Worshippers would gather in these windowless spaces, lit by oil lamps, to share meals and perform secretive rites. The ceremonies were deeply symbolic, divided into levels of initiation, like climbing invisible stairs in the dark. Many Mithraea were hidden deliberately. One lies beneath the Basilica of San Clemente, another beneath the baths of Caracalla. Some were only discovered when floors collapsed or old cellars were re-examined. Their walls still carry faint pigments, and their altars remain intact, frozen in the dim twilight of religious change. And deeper still, tombs that defy even educated guesswork. Among the most haunting is the so-called tomb of the Scipios, a family crypt belonging to one of Rome's most powerful dynasties. It was rediscovered in the 18th century near the Appian Way, its inscriptions revealing names like Scipio Africanus, the conqueror of Hannibal. But many chambers were looted or repurposed over the centuries. Stone sarcophagi lie empty. One tomb bears no inscription at all. Was it meant for someone who died too young? Or was it reserved, but never filled? Even the emperors themselves, left secrets in stone. The mausoleum of Augustus, once a towering structure of grandeur, became a garden, a fortress, a concert hall, and finally a ruin. It has been restored in modern times, but deep within, much remains uncertain. Who exactly was buried there, and how many urns have vanished with time? Then there are the lost libraries, perhaps the greatest mysteries of all. The tabularium, Rome's central archive, once held thousands of clay tablets. In scrolls, birth records, decrees, tax registers, census data, and empire's memory, written in ink and wax. Though the ruins remain beneath the Capitoline Hill, most of the contents have long since turned to dust. And beneath the Palatine Hill, archaeologists uncovered what they believe may be the Lupercala legendary cave said to be the site where Romulus and Remus, the mythical founders of Rome, were suckled by a she-wolf. The cave was decorated in colored marble and seashells, but the chamber proved too fragile to enter, and the full extent of what lies within remains unseen, protected by its own fragility. Sometimes the barriers to exploration are not physical, but political. Some tombs rest beneath churches, others beneath private homes. Still others are known only from vague maps or mentions in medieval texts lost between layers of city and soil. And so, they remain sealed off, shrouded in cobwebs and mystery, nestled between ancient columns and concrete foundations. And what might they hold? Scrolls lost to time, unlooted graves, the ashes of a forgotten emperor, or perhaps just more silenced, the gentle hush of centuries passing, uninterrupted. These subterranean spaces remind us that history is never fully unearthed. Much of Rome is still asleep beneath our feet, wrapped in darkness and time, waiting to be awakened or not. As we leave this quiet underworld, imagine your breath slowing, matching the stillness of those halls. Nothing stirs there now, just the steady pulse of a city built on memory, and above ground. In the flickering candlelight of a noble's villa, a different kind of life was unfolding. Now, let us leave the shadows of Rome's underbelly and rise gently into the warm light of an afternoon long past. The sun filters softly through linen curtains. The air smells faintly of myrrh and polished cedar. You are standing now in a crowded insula, but in the atrium of a Roman senator's villa. Here, in this rarefied space, daily life moves at a different rhythm. Gone are the cracked walls and communal stairs of the tenement blocks. Instead, polished travertine tiles echo softly under your sandals. Mosaic floors, vivid and intricate, depict scenes from Orpheus charming the animals, Neptune rising from the sea, Persephone dancing beneath pomegranate trees. Every step is a quiet pageant of colored stone. The atrium is the heart of the Homa-wide, open room with a rectangular pool at its center. The impluvium, collecting rainwater from the sloped opening above. The water reflects shifting patterns of sunlight and shadow onto the painted walls. The ceiling beams are high, made of rare wood. Painted frescoes show pastoral scenes. Herds of goats on rolling hills, fruit-laden vines, a sky impossibly blue. It is quiet here, but not silent. From deeper within the villa you might hear the faint sounds of a lyre, plucked gently by a slave practicing in the peristyle garden. There is the soft scuff of sandals across stone, perhaps the clink of amphorae, being brought up from the storeroom wine from Campania, oil from Hispania, garam from Baetica. The senator does not fetch these himself. That would be unseemly. There are dozens of slaves for such tasks. His day begins early, earlier than one might assume for the elite. By sunrise, he is already washed and dressed in a freshly pressed toga, thick and heavy with folds that must be arranged just so. His hair is trimmed, face shaved smooth by a personal attendant. The toga is a statement, not a convenience its length and whiteness, signifying his dignity, his status, his Romanness. In the tablinum, his semi-public office, he greets clients, dozens of them, lined up in the hallway and courtyard. They are petitioners, former soldiers, debtors, or junior politicians hoping for a word of advice. Each addresses him with deference, and each receives a polite nod, perhaps a coin, perhaps a promise. This is the salutatio, a daily ritual that reinforces status, obligation, and social glue. Afterwards, he may stroll to the forum, accompanied by his entourage. There he speaks with fellow senators, hears gossip, perhaps sits on a magistrate's bench. But soon he returns. The sun is high, and it is time for rest. The triclinium, or dining room, is darkened against the heat. Long couches, cushioned with dyed wool and embroidered linens, line 3 sides of the room. Slaves circulate quietly with trays of olives, boiled eggs, roasted dormice, and honeyed wine. The senator dines reclining, one elbow propped, shoes removed. Conversation is slow, measured on politics, philosophy, poetry. He might quote Virgil. He might lament the latest fashion in Alexandria. He might simply sip his wine and listen, eyes half closed. In the afternoon, he may visit his library. The scrolls are kept in wooden cabinets, their titles marked on ivory tags. Works of Cicero, Lucretius, and Livy rest beside translations from Greek philosophers. Some scrolls are already worn smooth at the edges from repeated reading. Others are new, gifted by a fellow patron or purchased from a scribal workshop. He may write letters on politics, trade, or family and dictate them aloud to a slave with good penmanship, who scratches them onto wax tablets, or, for more important missives, onto papyrus. Beyond the walls of the house, there may be a private bath complexa caldarium, tepidarium arranged in sequence, tiled in turquoise and gold. Marble benches line the walls. Heated air circulates beneath the floors. Oil is massaged into the skin before and after, followed by a scraping with a curved strigil, all done by servants in practiced silence. And then the day winds down. In the peristyle garden, where laurel trees rustle in the breeze and fountains murmur gently, he strolls again, slowly, hands behind his back. A tame peacock clucks softly in the corner. His wife tends to a cluster of violets, her silk stola, trailing over the mosaic paths. In the distance, beyond the garden wall, the noises of the city rise and fall. The clatter of wheels, a hawker's call, the bark of a dog. But inside, all is serene, controlled, ordered. He retires to a small side room, the cubiculum, where a low bed waits, dressed with fine wool blankets. A lamp flickers on a bronze stand. A servant removes his sandals. The city is fading now. The walls feel thicker here. The air still, perfumed faintly with lavender. Perhaps he thinks briefly of the distant provinces of wars in Germania, of merchants sailing from Egypt, of taxes due from Gaul. Perhaps he dreams of his son's future in the Senate, or of a villa by the sea, where olive trees bend to the breeze and time moves even more slowly. But soon, even these thoughts slip away. And thus ends the day of a Roman elite, not with pageantry, but with quiet withdrawal, as the heavy curtain of night draws across the eternal city. Let us now move to the end of our journey, to reflect, gently, on the world we've glimpsed. Imagine waking before the sun rises, your body stiff from sleeping on the frozen ground, wrapped tightly in felt blankets lined with sheepskin. The sky is an endless pale canvas of pre-dawn gray, and already the camp is stirring. This is the beginning of a day in a Mongol caravan, one of the many long trains of traders, messengers, and supply wagons that crisscross the vast territories of the Mongol Empire. Some caravans stretched for miles across the steppe, with dozens of carts pulled by oxen and camels and mounted riders flanking the sides, ever watchful for trouble. You would feel the chill deep in your bones, even in summer. The steppe could be cold in the morning. The fire is rekindled from last night's ashes, its faint warmth offering little comfort as you sip a thin, salty broth perhaps flavored with a bit of dried mutton, or a fermented mare's milk if you're lucky. Then the day begins. The horses are saddled, the carts loaded, the yurt's portable felt tents collapsed and lashed to pack animals. Everyone has a role, and every movement is practiced and swift. There is little room for error. A missing wheel, a broken yoke, or a lost animal can delay the group or worse leave you stranded in the middle of nowhere. The terrain is harsh. Flat, yes, but deceptive. The wind is nearly constant, scouring the land and drying your lips until they crack. Dust creeps into every fold of fabric and into your eyes and mouth. Your boots are stiff with salt and sweat. The animals snort and groan under their loads, but they move on, step by step, over grassland, gravel, snow, and stone. You may be part of a merchant train, carrying bolts of silk, blocks of tea, bricks of salt, or carefully packed ceramic jars. might even be transporting paper or medicinal herbs or beads from far-off India. But luxury is not your companion. Work is punishing. You ride and walk in long shifts, only stopping briefly to eat or rest. At night, the caravan forms a loose circle. Guards rotate watch duty, listening for wolves or worse raiders. Bandits were a constant threat, even in lands nominally under Mongol control. But still, trade routes flourished. The Mongol Khans knew the value of safe passage, and they did their best to protect it. When they could. Meals are simple. Hard bread, dried meat, millet. Sometimes there is warmth, laughter, or shared stories. Other times, silence. The wind howls across the open steppe like a restless spirit, and the stars above flicker like distant campfires. You lie down once more on stiff bedding, with your back aching and your breath fogging in the cold. There is no privacy, no comfort, just the creak of wood, the shuffle of hooves, and the unrelenting march of tomorrow. The rhythm of the caravan is not one of speed, but of endurance. It is life in motion, a life of dust, sweat, and silence. A life you could not escape, only survive. And now, from the lives of the many, we turn to the ambitions of one man who united them all. Let us ride through history and into the life of the great unifier, Genghis Khan. Imagine yourself once more on the vast open steppe. But this time, the world is not organized, is not paved with trade routes or dotted with orderly caravans. Instead, the grasslands are wild with rival clans, shifting loyalties, and ever-present danger. Are not in a caravan now, but in the chaotic and violent world of the 12th century Mongol tribes. It is here that a boy named Temujin was born, a boy who would become Genghis Khan. He was born into nobility, but among the Mongols, nobility was fragile. His father, a tribal chief, was poisoned by rivals when Temujin was still a child. Suddenly, the boy and his family were cast out, abandoned by their own people. They became outlaws, scavenging for roots and wild game to survive. In these years of hunger and exile, Temujin learned what it meant to be alone, and what it would take to command loyalty. He was captured once, imprisoned in a wooden collar. He escaped, he made alliances. He was betrayed. He survived. His path was not grand or glorious. It was a constant struggle, a game of patience and strategy, of words and arrows. Temujin had a remarkable memory and an uncanny ability to read people. He gathered allies carefully not by wealth or birth, but by merit and loyalty. He rewarded talent over lineage, a rare thing in his time. His rise was slow, marked by battles, betrayals, and an iron will. When he finally united the Mongol tribes under his banner, he was given the title Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. From this point, the world began to shift. The Mongols had always been fierce warriors, but Genghis Khan brought discipline and order. He reorganized the army into decimal unit sten, 100. 1,000 mixing tribes to break old loyalties and enforce unity. Every soldier had a role. Every man was part of a greater machine. They traveled light, moved fast, and struck with terrifying precision. But they were not just conquerors. Under Genghis Khan, the Mongols developed a relay system of mounted couriers, a kind of ancient postal service called the Yam. They enforced laws, protected merchants, and built networks that connected the far corners of Asia. He was not a man of palaces. He ruled from a yurt. He wore simple clothes. His laws were strict, and his punishments harsh. But his rule brought a kind of order the steppes had never known. Still, the conquests were devastating. Cities were leveled. Populations were decimated. The cost of empire was high. And yet, for those who lived under it, the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, opened up a world of opportunity. Genghis Khan did not live to see the full extent of his empire, but his sons and grandsons continued his work. From Korea to Eastern Europe, from the Persian Gulf to the Siberian forests, the Mongol banner flew. And when he died, perhaps in battle, perhaps from a fall off his horse, his body was buried in secret. According to legend, those who carried his body were killed to preserve the location. Even now, no one knows exactly where he lies. Genghis Khan remains a figure both feared and admired. A man of paradoxes, brutal and visionary, ruthless and reforming. A man who reshaped the world, starting with a broken childhood on the edge of survival. And now, with the empire carved and the steppe tamed under iron rule, let us turn our gaze downward. Beneath the ground and beneath the waves, lost cities and shipwrecked secrets wade quietly in the earth. Imagine the sound of wind sifting through dry grass. There are no cities here now, no walls or towers rising above the steppe. But centuries ago, in this open land, stood Karakorum, the capital of the Mongol Empire. Today, it seems impossible. The site is remote, even by Mongolian standards, and little survives above ground. A few stone turtles, weather-worn and still, scattering of foundations. But beneath the soil lies the ghost of a city that once welcomed merchants from Baghdad, diplomats from Paris, craftsmen from China, and scribes from Persia. Karakorum was built not for beauty but for purpose. After all, the Mongols were not city builders by tradition. Their lives were nomadic, woven into tents, pastures, and the rhythms of moving herds. But empire demanded administration. Roads required hubs. And so, on the banks of the Orkhan River, the great Khans raised their capital. The city wasn't vast like Baghdad or opulent like Hangzhou. It was functional fortified walls, enclosing temples, workshops, markets, and a palace. The royal court, though based in a yurt, sat atop elevated platforms. Around it, bureaucrats etched policies into scrolls, artisans poured molten metal into molds, and traders bartered silk for silver. Archaeologists have uncovered clues to this life kilns, where Chinese-style porcelain was fired. Coin molds and smelting pits, evidence of metalwork on an imperial scale. Even fragments of Christian crosses, Buddhist statues, and Islamic calligraphy proof of the religious diversity the Mongol rulers tolerated and even encouraged. One of the most intriguing discoveries is the silver tree, described by a European visitor named William of Rubrach. He wrote of a mechanical tree in the Khan's palace. Its silver branches bore fruit, and from its trunk flowed drinksurag wine and honeyed water poured through concealed tubes and spigots. Servants operated bellows to make animals carved from silver appear to roar and spout liquid. It was part engineering marvel, part theater, a symbol of power, precision, and the blending of cultures. But Karakorum's moment in the sun was brief. After the death of Genghis Khan, the empire fractured. The capital was moved to Khambalik, modern-day Beijing, by Kublai Khan, who turned the empire toward China. Karakorum was later burned and rebuilt, then abandoned again, left to slowly dissolve into the wind. And so, it remains hidden beneath layers of grass and stone, visited by shepherds and scholars, still yielding secrets to those who dig gently, patiently. Not golden hoards or dramatic tombs, but shards of daily life, fink pots, beads, charred grain, small things, quiet things, enough to reconstruct a vanished world. Other sites, too, lie scattered across the former Mongol world-buried roads. Outposts, watchtowers, and unmarked graves of soldiers and travelers who never returned. Occasionally, archaeologists find a bronze mirror, a horse bridle, a stone stupa in the wilderness, each a whisper from the past. Beneath all this, the question that still haunts historians: where is Genghis Khan buried? According to legend, his funeral procession killed every witness to conceal the site. The river was diverted to flow over his tomb. The earth was trampled flat by 1,000 horses. And so the location was lost, perhaps forever. Dozens of expeditions have searched the Mongolian steppe. None have succeeded. Perhaps the Khan wanted it that way. A man of motion whose monument would not be a pyramid or palace but the wind. The road, the silence of a landscape that remembers everything. Now, from these buried remnants and ruined capitals, let us turn toward a different world, the refined, fragrant, elite circles of power, where silk robes whispered along polished floors and quiet conversations could shape the fate of kingdoms. Imagine now that you are approaching the royal or jutha, grand encampment of a Mongol Khan. From a distance, it looks like a field of ivory domes scattered across the horizon. These are not ordinary tents, but gers round. Felt-covered structures lined with wood and wool, arranged with careful symmetry. At the center is the Khan's Gerlarger. Taller, its white exterior embroidered with intricate patterns, its frames strengthened with rare woods. The entrance always faces south, as was tradition. Inside, everything is ordered by custom and protocol. The east is reserved for honored guests, the west for family. The north, wall directly opposite the door, is the most sacred space, where the Khan sits on a raised platform, flanked by advisors, clerks, and guards. The atmosphere here is quietly charged. Voices are kept low. Every gesture carries meaning. Those who enter bow. Those who serve do so swiftly, silently.
Oh.
This is not a palace of stone. There are no marble columns or sweeping staircases. But within the circular walls of this mobile court flows the full machinery of empire. Diplomacy, warfare, tribute, administration, and art. In the mornings, the Khan meets with his NRC's sworn companions, generals, and trusted lieutenants. Their discussions are long, deliberate, and steeped in strategy. They speak of distant provinces, tribute routes, restive governors. Maps are unrolled, seals pressed into wax. Orders dictated to scribes who dip their brushes in black ink and write in the flowing script of the Uyghurs. Outside, couriers arrive on horseback, bearing scrolls from the far corners of the empire from Samarkand. From Kiev, from the eastern forests of Manchuria, the YAM system, an early postal relay of remarkable speed and reach, ensures the Khan is never long without news. And everywhere, there is movement, but it is graceful, never hurried. Servants in deep blue and red tunics move between tents. Some carry trays of fermented mares, milk rag, served in polished wooden bowls. Others bring plates of roasted mutton, flatbreads, and dried cheeses made from yak and goat. The air is laced with the sharp sweetness of juniper smoke, rising from braziers placed near the entrances. It is said to purify the space and please the spirits. You might catch the softer notes of sandalwood, too. Gifts from envoys out of India or Persia, used sparingly in this high, dry land. And then there are the entertainments, not loud or raucous, but performed with elegance and reverence. In the evenings, musicians perform with mourncore, the horsehead fiddle, its sound both mournful and serene. Throat singers chant ancient melodies, harmonizing with the wind itself, creating a haunting resonance that seems to echo beyond the confines of the court. Storytellers share tales of old dove wolves and ancestors, of the Sky Father and the Earth Mother, of Genghis Khan's birth beneath a blue light, and of battles where the earth shook beneath 1,000 hooves. The women of the court, powerful in their own right, manage complex networks of family ties, alliances, and trade. Many are educated, some advise directly. One might see the Cotton, the great lady of the Khan, overseeing the movements of caravans or hosting visiting dignitaries with subtle grace and authority. And the children, some of whom will rule vast territories, are taught from a young age the arts of war or the lessons of steppe law and the languages of the empire. They learn to ride before they walk, to wield bows before they can read. But in this court, they also learn the value of listening, of patience, of ceremony. Beneath it all, there is structure. The yasa, the great law of Genghis Khan, is the silent frame holding everything in place. It governs the roles of ministers, the rights of messengers, the punishment of theft, and the rules of loyalty. It is not written down in full, but everyone knows it. It is recited, remembered, obeyed. And so, the days pass in the cortege with its rhythm, its rituals, its hum of purpose beneath the stillness. The Khan's court could move at a moment's notice, dismantling the tents, packing the scrolls, and setting off to a new plane. But the essence remained the same: order in motion, elegance and simplicity, power and silence. As the stars rise above the endless horizon and the camp falls into hushed rest, one might walk between the sleeping gares and hear only the wind and the occasional whinny of a tethered horse. The heart of an empire, wrapped in felt and starlight, humming softly in the night. Imagine waking before dawn, the sky still deep with stars, the air sharp and cool against your skin. The village is just beginning to stir. Smoke curls from low stone hearths, carrying the faint smell of peat and wood smoke into the quiet morning. The sea calls, relentless and nearby. Your first task is to prepare the fishing gear. Nets, woven from hemp and stretched by countless hands, are heavy with salt and must be mended carefully to avoid losing precious catch. Wooden boats, clumsy and creaking, rest in small coves, tethered tightly to prevent them from drifting out with the tide. Fishing itself is exhausting work. Hours spent rowing or standing in shallow waters, casting nets, hauling in slippery fish, their scales glinting faintly under the rising sun. The hands grow raw, calloused from ropes and the rough edges of wooden oars. The catch is never guaranteed. Storms can turn calm, waters violent, destroying nets and sending boats crashing onto jagged rocks. Long, cold winters mean frozen seas and hungry mouths. Summer might bring abundance, but it is brief and always shadowed by the threat of scarcity. Back in the village, drying racks stretch over open spaces where fish are salted and hung to cure. The pungent scent of drying cod and herring fills the air, a smell both familiar and persistent.
Weaving itself into daily life.
Children run among the huts, their laughter light but fleeting, as many grow up too quickly to the hardships of their world. Inside the huts, life is cramped and smoky. Hearth fires offer warmth, but also choke the air with thick smoke, mingling with the smell of damp wool and fish oil. Floors are packed earth, often cold and uneven. Beds are simple straw mattresses, covered with worn animal skins. Privacy is scarce. Space is shared tightly among family members, and sometimes animals. Meals are humble. Dried fish, dark rye bread, and boiled greens form the staples. Meat is a rarity, save for special occasions or barter. Water comes from nearby streams, cold and fresh, but never abundant. Beyond the physical hardships, life is shaped by uncertainty. Every day brings the risk of illness, scurvy, infections, and the common cold could linger dangerously long in such close quarters. Without doctors, healing relied on herbs, luck, and community care. Despite the hardships, there is a rhythm to the village lifa pattern dictated by the tides, the seasons, and the steady rise and fall of the sun. People find moments of rest and ritual, sharing stories by firelight, weaving nets, repairing tools, and honoring the cycles of nature that govern their existence. As you imagine yourself there, the cold sea breeze brushing your face, the steady creak of timber, underfoot, and the distant call of gulls overhead, you begin to understand the endurance it took simply to live in a Viking fishing village, a life far from easy, marked by a constant struggle against nature and circumstance. Now imagine the tale of Leif Erikson, a name echoing through the cold mists of the North Atlantic. A figure both adventurous and emblematic of the Viking spirit. Born into a world of fjords and forests, his story is woven with journeys that stretched far beyond the cramped fishing villages we just left behind. Leif was the son of Eric the Red, the fiery settler who first braved the icy seas to establish a colony on Greenland. The boy grew up with the roar of the ocean in his ears, the scent of pine and salt in the air, and stories of distant lands whispered around hearth fires. He learned early the skills that shaped a Viking navigation by stars, seamanship, and the endurance to face the unknown. Picture Leif standing at the prow of his longship, sails billowing gently as the vessel cuts through cold, dark waters. The sky is overcast, the waves steady but relentless, rocking the ship like a cradle in the vast expanse of the Atlantic. It was this daring voyage around the year 1000 CE that led him to lands far west, what would later be called Vinland. The journey was far from easy. Days and nights blurred beneath shifting skies. The crew battled icy spray and unpredictable currents, their hands raw from hauling sails and manning oars. Supplies were scarce, and hope was tethered tightly to the horizon. Upon landing, Leif and his men found fertile shores and dense forests, a land rich with resources unknown to their home. The air was thick with unfamiliar scents, wild grapes, towering evergreens, and fresh earth turned by unknown beasts. The promise of abundance sparked hope, but was shadowed by caution. As the Vikings knew the land could be as unforgiving as the sea, Leif's expeditions set up temporary camps, hunting and gathering to sustain themselves. The saga tells of encounters with native peoples, whom the Vikings called Skrallings, a name spoken quietly, with both curiosity and apprehension. These meetings were complex, filled with tension and moments of uneasy peace. As you imagine the campfires flickering against the twilight, the smell of wood smoke mingling with the crisp night air, and the murmurs of men sharing tales and plans, you sense the mix of wonder and weariness that must have settled over these early explorers. Leif Erikson's voyage, though a brief chapter in the grand sweep of history, symbolized the Vikings' restless spirit, a blend of survival, discovery, and the desire to find new homes beyond familiar horizons. But beneath the heroism lay the same unyielding demands of daily life: hunger, cold, danger, and the endless toil that shaped their every moment. This story, told and retold in sagas, whispers across the centuries, a gentle reminder of a time when the sea was both a barrier and a bridge, and a single journey could change the course of lives forever. Now, imagine turning your gaze northwards, to the rugged, icy shores of Greenland where once stood thriving Viking settlements, now silent and swallowed by time. The echoes of these communities are scattered across rocky fjords and grassy knolls, where ruins peek through moss and lichen, telling a quiet story of resilience and eventual decline. The Greenland colonies were established by Norse settlers in the late 10th century. Led by Eric the Red, Leif Erikson's father, these hardy pioneers carved out homes on the edge of the Arctic wilderness, enduring long winters where sunlight barely touched the land, and summers that burst with fleeting warmth. Picture a village nestled between craggy cliffs and the cold, restless sea. Timber houses with turf roofs huddled close together against the biting wind. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of peat fires, and the salty temps of dried fish hung from wooden beams. Life here was a constant negotiation with nature's extremes: frostbite in winter, scarcity of crops, and unpredictable seas. Farming was a delicate task on the thin, rocky soil. The settlers grew hardy vegetables, like cabbage and peas, in small plots, tended to livestock, including sheep and cattle, animals that needed care and protection from harsh weather. The rhythm of their lives followed the seasons closely, each day marked by the urgent need to prepare for the long, dark winters. Trade was a vital lifeline. Greenland's Norse depended on contact with Europe for iron tools, cloth, and other essentials. While they sent back walrus ivory and furs, commodities prized in distant markets, ships came and went across stormy waters, their arrivals uncertain but eagerly awaited. But as decades passed, the settlements faced mounting challenges. Climate shifts brought colder temperatures, shortening growing seasons and thickening sea ice, which blocked supply routes. Isolation deepened. Evidence from archaeological digs reveals signs of hardship dwellings repaired repeatedly, bones showing nutritional stress, and a gradual decline in imported goods. The mystery of the Norse disappearance from Greenland has long fascinated historians and explorers. Some theories suggest they migrated south or assimilated with indigenous Inuit peoples, while others point to environmental change, economic decline, or even conflicts. The truth remains partially buried beneath the tundra, waiting quietly to be unearthed. Imagine standing on a windswept hillside overlooking the empty ruins, the wind whispering through broken stones and twisted remnants of walls. The silence carries a solemn beauty, a testament to human tenacity amid the vast and indifferent wilderness. This vanished world invites contemplation: how civilizations rise and fall, and how the delicate balance with nature governs the fate of those who dwell at the edge of the known. Imagine yourself stepping away from the rugged village ruins and moving south to Napata, one of ancient Nubia's great centers of power and culture. Here, beneath wide skies scattered with stars, the rhythm of elite life pulses softly with incense smoke and whispered ceremony. Napata's royal court was a world apart from the harshness of daily toil along the Nile-esque cataracts. Picture a palace built of mud, brick, and stone, its walls adorned with colorful frescoes and hieroglyphs that tell stories of gods, kings, and ancestors. The air inside is thick with the warm scent of burning frankincense and myrrh, the smoke curling upward in gentle spirals toward the vaulted ceilings. Imagine nobles draped in finely woven linens and animal skins, leopard pelts, prized for their status, gathered in shaded courtyards where musicians play wooden flutes and framed drums, their rhythms steady and soothing under the vast Nubian sky. The music carries a sacred quality, marking moments of prayer, feast, or quiet reflection. Life in the noble house was governed by ritual and hierarchy. Political decisions unfolded through whispered conversations and carefully measured gestures. Nobles and priests observed strict codes of conduct, honoring the gods and ancestors to maintain the fragile balance between earth and the divine. Picture feasts laid out on low tables, platters of roasted game, fresh bread, dates, and sweet honey cakes. Guests recline on cushions, savoring food and drink while stories of heroic kings and legendary battles drift through the air. The glow of oil lamps flickers against carved wooden chests and gleaming gold jewelry, symbols of wealth and power drawn from Nubia's rich lands. Yet even in this rarefied setting, life was shaped by the ever-present Nile. The river's floods dictated the seasons, and the court marked time with celestial observations, aligning festivals and ceremonies with the movements of stars and the sun. This celestial harmony was a constant reminder of the universe's order and the king's role as its earthly steward. Outside the palace walls, servants and guards moved silently, their presence barely noticeable, yet essential to the court's function. The nobles' lives were entwined with the land, the river, and the spirits that watched over them. A delicate dance of power, devotion, and tradition. As you imagine the night stretching across the sands, the palace alive with quiet conversations and ritual, there is a calm dignity in this ancient world one that blends the demands of rule with a deep connection to nature and the sacred. Imagine yourself waking before the sun. It is cold, biting cold, the kind that stiffens joints and numbs fingers before you even reach for your boots. You're sleeping in a felt tent, if you're lucky. Curled up beside sacks of dried goods and stiff blankets that carry the scent of animal hair and wood smoke. Outside, the stars are still fading over the silhouette of the Pamir Mountains, or perhaps the dark edge of the Taklamakan Desert. The wind whistles softly, a constant companion. You hear them before you see them. The camels, groaning, coughing, snorting, their thick padded feet shuffling as they rise. You know the sounds well. You'll spend nearly every waking moment among them for the coming weeks. Some are restless, some stubborn. Others already stand, swaying slightly, their breath steaming in the morning air. The caravan is small today, perhaps only 30 camels, a few handlers, and a scribe from a distant city. You've been assigned the mid-pack animals, a pair of woolly Bactrians, with uneven tempers and bellies packed with sacks of tea, lacquerware, and dried meat. Before moving, you check their hooves. Each one, carefully. Stones lodge in the tough pads and sores can quickly become infected. You run your fingers over cracked leather harnesses and tighten the ropes across the heavy cargo, your breath forming small clouds with each exhale. Breakfast is quiet, salted yak butter tea, a small round of barley flatbread, still hard from the night, and a few dried apricots. You eat standing up, already beginning to walk. The rhythm of the caravan doesn't wait for comfort. By mid-morning, the cold has broken into a dry, biting heat. The wind picks up as you walk steady, relentless, blowing dust into your eyes and mouth. Sand clings to everything. Your scarf, your lips, the backs of your hands. The air smells faintly of sweat, wool, and old smoke, and yet the horizon always shifts. Sometimes jagged red cliffs like broken pottery line your path. Other times vast rolling dunes that shimmer with trapped heat. A mirage now and then, a flicker of false water. You learn not to trust your eyes too much. There are no roads here, only faint tracks carved into the earth by generations of beasts and boots. If you're lucky, there's a guide who knows the wells, the caves, the dry riverbeds that still hold moisture in clay pockets. If not, you follow cairns of stacked stone left by past travelers. Midday brings a stop, but not for rest, only to shift loads and check the weaker camels. One lies down too early, stubborn and gasping, must be coaxed to rise with firm shouts, and the sting of a switch, though you hate doing it, you rub its neck afterward. Whisper apologies. Afternoons are harsher. The sun is high and your lips are dry and cracked. Water is rationed carefully. You do not drink when you're thirsty, you drink when you're told. Most of it is reserved for the animals, theirs is the greater burden. Nightfall is not rest. It is chores. Unload the cargo. Secure the animals. Cook with what little fuel you can find. Dried dung, if no wood is near. You boil millet with salt, maybe a scrap of dried mutton. The stars blink alive in silence, bright and endless above. Sometimes there are stories around the fire, not joyful ones, but tales of other caravans lost in sandstorms, attacked by bandits near Kashgar, frozen in a sudden blizzard near Dunhuang. But no one tells them loudly. They're spoken low, with eyes cast down. Sleep comes late, curled in your cloak, boots still on. You listen to the camels murmur, to the hiss of the wind, and to the soft scrape of sand moving over the earth. Tomorrow will be the same. 1,000 more steps, another cracked rope to fix, another mountain pass to cross. This is the rhythm of the caravan, relentless, monotonous, exhausting, but in it, a strange peace. A world reduced to sound, smell, and movement, to quiet companionship with beasts that trust you, to a simple truth: walk, rest, repeat, and in the distance, always. The next market, the next city, the promise of coin, of silk, of a return, however fleeting. As we leave behind the windswept rhythm of the caravan trail, we turn our thoughts now to the figure whose shadow still stretches across the steppe. Genghis Khan, a name spoken in both awe and fear. But tonight, there will be no battle cries, no galloping hooves and storming conquest. Instead, we'll move quietly, steadily, tracing the rise of a herder's son who would one day unify a scattered world. Imagine yourself again among the low, rolling grasslands of Mongolia. The sky stretches endlessly overhead, unbroken blue from one horizon to the next. There are no cities here, no roads, no stone towers. Just the land and the herders who move with the seasons. Before he was Genghis Khan, he was named Temujin. Born around 1162, his world was not the empire he would come to build, but a life bound to survival among the harsh rhythms of nomadic existence. His family was cast out of their tribe after his father's death. They were left to fend for themselves, scraping meals from wild roots and small game, fishing icy rivers, and patching together clothes from what they could find. It was a life without certainty, one of hunger, suspicion, and shifting alliances. The Mongol tribes of that time were fragmented, clans feuded, raids were constant. Loyalty was thin, often bound only to blood or bribes. And yet Temujin, even in youth, seemed to understand something deeper. That power came not just from strength, but from the ability to hold people together. Bit by bit, he began to gather allies, not only family, but skilled warriors, shamans, blacksmiths, and even former enemies. He formed bonds through marriage, through oath, through careful trust. Loyalty was rewarded, betrayal remembered. He did not rise with drama, but with quiet determination, each small success folding into the next, like the careful weaving of a horsehair rope. By his early 30s, Temujin had begun shaping something new, a code, a system. He reorganized tribal loyalties into ranks based not on noble birth, but on merit. He appointed commanders based on skill. He reshaped punishment and reward. No longer would tribal leaders command loyalty simply for their name. Every warrior now answered to a leader greater than blood, the Khan. In 1206, after years of battle and negotiation, the steppe's most powerful leaders gathered on the banks of the Anan River. There, they declared Temujin to be Genghis Khan, universal ruler of the Mongols. The title carried weight, but more than that, it marked a transformation. The steppe was no longer a scattering of rival clans. It had become something singular. But this was no throne-bound monarch in golden silk. Genghis Khan lived in a felt tent, ate the same dried meats as his soldiers, consulted the same sky for weather and omens. He shared hardship, rode with the army, and expected no luxury above the rest. He understood systems deeply. Trade routes were secured. Messengers galloped from one end of the empire to the other on a network of way stations. Rest stops stocked with food and fresh horses. Local leaders were left in place if they submitted. Laws were written down clear, strict, but often surprisingly practical. And yet, even as the empire expanded across vast distances, from China to the Caspian, the heart of it remained in the saddle. Among the felt tents, among the herders who rose before dawn to tend to their horses and drink warm, salty milk tea, to unify the Mongol world was not simply to conquer, it was to tame the unpredictable rhythms of the steppe. To take what was scattered and forge it into rhythm, to a caravan of tribes moving under one banner. Genghis Khan passed in 1227, and the place of his burial remains unknown. It is said his body was returned to the wild places of his youth, buried in silence by loyal guards who were sworn to secrecy. Whether beneath a mountain or lost in a wooded plain, no monument marks the spot. Only the whisper of wind through grass, and the long, slow beat of hooves moving westward. As the sun sinks low over the grasslands, and the firelight of the caravan flickers against woolen tent walls, we turn now to a place that once pulsed at the very center of the Mongol world. A city now silent, capital nearly forgotten. Karakorum. Imagine the vast plains stretching out in every direction, rimmed by distant mountains and the occasional fluttering shape of a falcon overhead. Then picture, tucked quietly into this remote landscape, city built not from grandeur or opulence, but from intentioned stone walls and wooden gates, palaces beside smithies, temples beside marketplaces. This was no accidental sprawl. It was a place chosen, ordered, and built to anchor an empire that had never before rested. Founded around the year 1220 by Genghis Khan and expanded under his successor, Karakorum served not just as a geographic hub, but a symbol, a statement, that even a people of the wind and the open steppe could shape permanence. Even riders could build a seat of power. The city's walls stretched more than a mile wide, encircling buildings both humble and monumental. In the heart of the city stood a silver tremechanical, they say, with arms that poured wine, mead, and fermented mare's milk at royal banquets. Round it gathered blacksmiths, artisans, clerks, translators, and officials. One might hear a dozen languages spoken in the marketplace in a single hour: Persian, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, and Mongolian, all woven together by trade. And there were monks, 2 Buddhists and Christians, Muslims and Confucians, each welcomed, or at least tolerated, in the great crossroads that Karakorum had become. For the Mongols, governance meant incorporation, not erasure. So long as tribute was paid and loyalty sworn, diversity was permitted, event encouraged. Under Gedai Khan, stone temples were built for foreign faiths. Roads led in from all directions. Couriers changed horses at relay stations, carrying messages across the empire's breadth. Diplomats lodged in carved wood houses beside fields of millet and fenced-in herds. Still, Karakorum was never a typical city. Unlike Constantinople or Baghdad, it lacked towering minarets or crowded avenues. It retained a quiet sparseness, less a metropolis than a functioning administrative heart. A place where decisions were made over cups of butter tea, and policies drafted on scrolls stretched over knee-high tables. And yet, despite its significance, Karakorum did not endure. After the Mongols shifted power to Khambalik present day, Beijing, the old capital, fell into decline. By the 14th century, it was little more than a memory. Its stones were repurposed, its foundations left to weather in silence. For centuries, travelers crossed the plains unaware of what lay beneath the grass. But in recent decades, archaeologists have returned to the site, armed with ground-penetrating radar and careful hands. They've uncovered kill sites where ceramic tiles were once fired, fragments of metal implements, coins from across the empire, and remnants of inscriptions once nailed to palace walls. These discoveries are small, quiet, a shard here, a post hole there, but together they whisper of a place where nomads once paused, where orders were sent across continents, where the rhythms of an empire, born from horseback, tried however briefly to take root in stone. Today, the silence of Karakorum is profound. The wind still moves through the valley. Birds circle overhead. If you close your eyes, you might almost hear the echo of hooves, the low murmur of trade, the careful stroke of a scribe's brush against parchment in the early hours of dawn. Let us now journey to the center of power, not a palace of marble, but a court under felt canopies and the wide arc of the sky. Imagine yourself in the grand encampment of a Mongol Khan. The court moves with the seasons. In winter, it gathers in sheltered valleys, where the wind bites less cruelly. In summer, it travels to the cooler uplands, past rivers and across grassy meadows. It is not a fixed palace, but a mobile capital. Its walls made of tent fabric and horsehide. Its halls of open air, and its throne set not upon a dais, but surrounded by respect and rank. Approaching the court, the first thing you might notice is the silence. Not the absence of sound, but a kind of order. Yurts, or gairs, arranged in precise circles and rings for the elite. Outer ones for guards, scribes, cooks, and attendants. Beyond the animals, thousands of horses, sheep, and goats grazing beneath watchful eyes. Smoke rises in thin trails from hearths. The smell of boiled mutton, fermented mare's milk, and burning dung hovers gently in the wind. The court of a Mongol Khan is not chaotic, as outsiders once imagined. It is tightly controlled, regulated by centuries-old traditions and the commands of the ruling family. There are guards at every approach, silent, mounted, observing. Diplomats and envoys dismount far from the central yurt and must bow, sometimes crawling, before they are admitted. Inside the Khan's life is ceremonial. Thick felt carpets line the ground. Wooden chests with brass hinges hold valuables, scrolls, gifts, seals. There may be silk hangings, traded from China or the Persian courts. The air is warm and heavy with the scent of incense, fat-burning lamps, and the damp wool of outer cloaks. The Khan does not dine alone. Meals are communal, taken with family members, military leaders, and favored guests. Food arrives in wide bowls broth and roasted meat, thick bread, and salted cheese. There is etiquette here. Drink offered in a clockwise turn, the host sipping first, the guest bowing in thanks. To refuse food is an insult, to speak out of turn, a risk. And music is essential. Horsehead fiddles sing long, low notes as women chant epic songs of Genghis Khan's deeds. Storytellers recite histories, often from memory, tracing lineages back through the generations. These are not mere entertainments. They are reaffirmations of identity, of conquest, of divine favor. Outside the yurt, matters of empire are conducted with efficient seriousness. Scribes scratch decisions into paper or bark, seals are pressed in red wax, riders are dispatched at dawn to relay the Khan's decisions across the land. From the Korean coasts to the Caspian Sea, the Khan himself may be young or old, genial or ruthless. But in every case, his presence is absolute. He is both leader and law, his authority affirmed by the eternal blue sky, the divine principle believed to guide and legitimize Mongol rule. Women in the court are not absent from power. Queens and royal mothers wield influence, especially behind the scenes. They manage tribute, arrange marriages, oversee ceremonial matters, and sometimes even lead in times of crisis. Their voices, though rarely recorded, echo through the folds of policy and protocol. And yet, despite the trappings of power, the court remains humble in form. The Khan, like his people, sleeps on mats. His walls are made of felt and timber. The empire breathes with him, yet he walks on grass like the rest. When night falls, the stars emerge in brilliant clarity. The silence deepens. The fires flicker low. Guards pace softly along the perimeter. Somewhere a child stirs in their sleep beside the wool-clad warmth of a parent. And the Khan's court alive with stories, tension, strategy, and ceremony settles into the stillness of another night beneath the steppe sky. Imagine the first light of morning creeping over the Nile. A thin mist hovers just above the surface of the water, and the reeds shiver with the calls of ibis and cranes. Somewhere beyond the riverbanks, stone walls catch the rising sun, reflecting gold into the sand-hued landscape. You are already awake. If you are a palace servant in the house of life, the royal complex of the pharaoh, you do not sleep past the dawn. Your body learns to rise with the sun, just as the priests and astronomers chart its daily path. The palace itself never sleeps fully. Even in the quiet hours, there are embers to tend, linens to fold, and messages to carry silently from hall to hall. You dress quickly if you're fortunate, you wear a clean kilt of linen. If you're of lower rank, your garment may be threadbare and rough to the skin. You tie it securely with a sash and press your hands over your hair to neaten it. There is no time for breakfast. That, like many comforts, is reserved for those with rank. Inside the palace, light flickers from oil lamps, mounted in niches carved into the walls. These corridors are cool in the morning, the stone still holding the chill of night. Your bare feet make no sound. Silence, in fact, is one of your greatest skills. Servants in the palace are not meant to be heard unless spoken to. You may spend hours at a time standing at attention beside a chamber door, holding a tray of perfumed oils, or waiting for a noble's sandals to be removed and cleaned. There are words, of course, whispered between glances. Traded in kitchens and side passages, but in the halls of power, silence is safer. Tasks are varied and constant. You might be charged with polishing bronze mirrors, preparing incense mixtures with powdered myrrh and pine resin, or delivering folded scrolls to scribes. Other times, you scrub floors on your hands and knees, or carry fresh water from deep basins to the private baths of temple functionaries. All the while, the expectation is obedience without pause or protest. Disobedience, even subtle disobedience, can result in punishment. A wrong step, a spoken word out of turn, a delay in fulfilling an order, these small infractions are remembered, not always punished immediately, but logged. And if a superior calls your name, you bow low. You do not meet their eyes unless permitted. Meals, when they come, are eaten quickly and without ceremony. A piece of bread, perhaps a handful of figs, or a strip of dried fish. On better days, stewed lentils. On worse days, nothing at all until the moon is high again. You are not alone in this world of service. Sometimes, hundreds of other attendants move through the palace like clockwork. Some are born into servitude. Others are brought from distant regions of the kingdom. Most live in cramped quarters behind the palace walls, sleeping on mats of woven reeds, their sandals arranged neatly beside them in the dust. You hear the footsteps of guards and officials, the clinking of gold rings against carved doorways, the muffled voice of a priest reciting sacred phrases from memory. You are surrounded by grandeur, yet none of it is yours. Your proximity to the Pharaoh places you at the center of divine power, yet you yourself remain unseen. If you are good at your duties, you will remain invisible. That is the paradox of palace service close to greatness, yet consumed by it. There are moments of strange beauty. Perhaps a royal child pauses to hand you a lotus flower without words. Perhaps you are allowed to witness the king's procession from a corner of the courtyard, your heart catching at the colors of the banners and the shimmer of his headdress. But these are fleeting. Mostly your days are repetition, ritual, routine, folding, fetching, bowing. You become an expert in the rhythm of royal life, so much so that it feels like music you've memorized, even if you never get to dance. As night falls and the last ceremonial lamps are extinguished, you return to your quarters, legs aching, fingers blistered, throat dry from speaking nothing at all. You lay your body down on the mat, your muscles heavy. You listen to the distant sound of flutes in the halls above. You may serve again tomorrow, or you may be reassigned. Either way, your name will not be remembered, but your work continues. The palace walls shimmer in the heat. Hieroglyphs speak of divine order of generations past in rhythm with the gods. But now, something has changed. The old gods Ammon, Isis, Horus whispered to, for centuries in darkened temples are quiet. And in their place, a new light blazes. At the heart of this transformation is a man once known as Amenhotep IV, who would become Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh. His face, long and narrow in statues, gazes not toward battle or gold, but toward the sun. Not just any sun, but a single gotten, the visible disk of sunlight itself. Imagine that, the great royal court of Egypt, suddenly told that the myriad of deities they'd worshipped, petitioned, and feared were no longer sovereign. In their place, a single being, a radiant circle in the sky. Akhenaten's rise to the throne began like many before him. He was born into the royal line, a child of wealth, ceremony, and expectation. But even from the beginning, his reign veered off the familiar track. Early in his rule, he declared a religious revolution. The temples of Thebes, once full of incense and animal offerings to Ammon, were shuttered. Priests found themselves out of favor. Statues were destroyed or hidden. He moved the capital itself. Abandoning the sacred city of his ancestors for a new one, he ordered built from scratch. The city was called Akhenaten, horizon of the Aten. It rose swiftly on a patch of desert, far from the old centers of power. Limestone temples, broad avenues, and sunlit courtyards were constructed in what felt like a divine race against time. The royal family relocated there, along with chosen priests, servants, and artists. And life in this city followed new rules. Worship was now focused on the sun's warmth, its light, its life-giving energy. Ceremonies were held in open-air spaces, so the rays of Aten could touch the skin of worshippers directly. Gone were the dark sanctuaries of old. Now, prayer required sunlight. Akhenaten himself played a central role in this worship. He was not just a king, he was the sole intermediary between Aten and the people. And his depictions changed too. No longer the idealized warrior, he was shown with a softer, androgynous form, with full lips, wide hips, and a gentle belly. Some believe this reflected new theological symbolism. Others suggest it was simply his real appearance, immortalized in stone. But beneath this revolutionary vision, the foundations of the empire began to strain. The traditional priesthood, displaced and resentful, waited. The military elite grew restless. Foreign relations faltered. For the common people, the rituals of daily life became confusing.
Hey, which gods should they honor?
Could they still leave offerings for their ancestors? Was it safe to whisper prayers to the old names?
Meanwhile, life in Akhenaten was both orderly and odd.
The royal family, Akhenaten, his queen Nefertiti, and their daughters were often depicted in moments of tenderness. Bathed in the long rays of Aten, scenes show them eating together, holding hands, even kissing rare, in intimate portrayals for royal figures. But outside those images, the empire trembled. Eventually, the strain grew to great. After Akhenaten's death, his city was abandoned. His successor, the boy king Tutankhamun, returned to the old gods. Temples were reopened. Statues of Ammon were raised once again. Akhenaten's name was removed from records. His memory was not honored, it was erased. And yet, his revolution left marks that could not be wholly undone. Artistic styles had shifted. The idea of a single divine force had been tested. Even his ruined city, buried by sand, would one day be uncovered by archaeologists, its inscriptions still glowing with sunlight. For those who served him, scribes, builders, musicians, cooks, the change had been both invigorating and exhausting. Imagine being a servant during those years. One decade you bow to Amon's priests, next your prayers must face only the sun. Your former rituals are forbidden, your training obsolete. You adapt or disappear. And still, the duties remain. Meals to prepare, floors to sweep, tablets to copy. And always the heat of the sun ever present in the kingdom of Aten. Now, let your mind drift deeper downward through layers of golden sand and crumbling limestone. The heat fades, replaced by the cool stillness of stone. You are descending into the Valley of the Kings, where silence lingers like incense in the air and shadows pool in every carved crevice. For thousands of years, this narrow valley west of the Nile has hidden the dead end, the dreams of Egypt's most powerful rulers. Pharaohs who claimed divinity, nobles who sought eternity. Here, beneath layers of rock, they prepared for the afterlife with the finest treasures and the most elaborate inscriptions they could muster. And yet, not all who entered these chambers did so in reverence. The tombs of Egypt were never truly safe, not even from the moment they were sealed. Despite curses carved into stone, despite trap-filled corridors and clever illusions, many of these sacred resting places were violated, robbed, emptied, sometimes within mere decades of their construction. Picture it now late at night, the moon casting a pale glow over the desert ridges. A small group of men in coarse linen crouch by the cliff face. They carry chisels, ropes, and oil lamps with trembling flames. Their leader murmurs an incantation, half a plea for forgiveness, half a ward against the dangers of this sacred theft. Inside, the tomb awaits. The walls are painted in ochre and lapis. Images of gods and boats, of offerings and eternal gardens. The air smells faintly of resin and long-faded incense. The robbers press forward, their sandals muffled on the dusty stone. They've heard rumors of traps of corridors that collapse, of doors that spring shut behind the unwary, of narrow shafts that lead nowhere but death. Still, the lure of gold outweighs the fear. They break through the seals, slide open the stone slabs, and find sometimes riches, other times only dust and bones. In one tomb, a nest of pottery jars holding perfumes and oils, hardened to amber by centuries. In another, a pile of linen-wrapped offerings, figs, barley, lotus roots, long since withered. And sometimes, they find something else. Unfinished chambers, walls partly carved, then abandoned. Tombs that were started for a noble or scribe, but never completed. Or passages that disappear into bedrock, cut off mid-descent. What happened there? Why did they stop? Were there plans to return that never came to pass? Modern archaeologists, brushing away centuries of sand, still encounter these mysteries. A sealed doorway, but to where? A false floor that echoes oddly beneath a footstep, narrow shaft behind a statue hinting at more. Some believe that undiscovered chambers still hide within the cliff's domes of forgotten queens. Secret caches of papyrus scrolls, lost treasures buried during times of chaos. Even in the most famous tombs, surprises remain. Consider the tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered nearly intact by Howard Carter in 1922, behind its golden mask and nested coffins. Researchers have found irregularities in the plaster walls. Could there be another chamber still hidden? Some suggest it might belong to Nefertiti Akhenaten's queen, and a puzzle of history in her own right. And in other tombs, more subtle traces remain. Faint fingerprints in wet plaster. Graffiti left by ancient inspectors. Torch burns on ceilings from previous intruders, evidence of looting and of restoration. For not all robbers were outside men. Sometimes the very workers who built the tombs returned to them. A mason who knew the route, scribe who remembered where the valuables had been placed. Even priests, centuries later, opened sealed tombs not to steal, but to rescue mummies and reinter them elsewhere during times of instability. The Valley of the Kings was never static. It was a living place, in its way, place of memory, reverence, betrayal, and silence. And below it all, through twists of tunnel and chamber, there is a sense of stillness that words barely touch. An ancient quiet. A hum, just below the threshold of hearing. Imagine standing there now, lantern in hand, surrounded by painted gods whose names were once whispered daily, but are now silent. You breathe in cool air, thick with the scent of earth and age. The walls seem to lean inward slightly, as if listening. And ahead of you, another sealed doorway, untouched for centuries. What lies behind it? Perhaps it will remain a mystery, or perhaps one day a careful brushstroke and a beam of sunlight will reveal another world within stone. Now, rise gently from the depths of the tombs and return to the golden light above. The desert air grows warmer, the sky wide and cloudless over the banks of the Nile. You find yourself in the city of Thebes, once the beating heart of religious power in ancient Egypt. It is a place of processions and petitions, of ceremonies and incense, of silence broken only by chant and gong. Imagine approaching the great temple of Karnak, colossal pillars rising like petrified, papyrus stalks into the endless blue. The air is thick with the scent of lotus oil and sweet myrrh, drifting from censers swung by robed attendants. The ground beneath your feet is worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, both humble and royal. Here, the priests do not toil like laborers, nor fight like soldiers, yet their lives are no less structured, no less exhausting. They live within an unyielding rhythm, a life carved out in cycles of prayer, purification, and politics. The high priest of Amun rises before dawn. His body must be clean, his thoughts composed. Before entering the temple's inner sanctum, he must bathe, shave, and don immaculate linen garments fresh for each ceremony. No hair, no blemish, no mark of disorder is allowed. The gods demand perfection. Inside, the rituals begin. Offerings are prepared with care loaves of bread shaped just so. Cuts of meat laid out in ritual proportion, beer brewed in sacred silence. Statues of the gods are anointed with oils and perfumes, dressed in fine cloth and spoken to with reverence. To modern eyes, it may seem theatrical, but to those who lived it, this work was vital, maintained the order of the universe. Without these rites, the Nile might not flood, the sun might not rise, chaos might return. And so the priests continued, day after day, through seasons and rains, their chants echoing off stone walls beneath painted ceilings. They memorized thousands of lines from sacred texts. They performed long rituals in precise sequence. Some oversaw temple storehouses and granaries, massive centers of wealth and redistribution. Others advised pharaohs, interpreting omens or consulting oracles. A select few scribes, cloaked in quiet authority, recorded the movements of stars and the rise and fall of the Nile. Astronomy and theology were deeply intertwined. The gods moved through the heavens, and their cycles had to be understood, mapped, and honored. There were priests for healing, priests for embalming, priests who studied dreams and portents. The temple was not merely a place of worship. It was a library, a school, a vault, a court. Within its walls, the mysteries of eternity were debated and codified. But this elite life was not without its burdens. The hierarchy was rigid. Rank mattered immensely. One wrong step in ceremony, one mispronounced phrase could mean disgrace. Political intrigue crept even into holy precincts. Which god received more offerings? Which temple held more favor with the pharaoh? These were questions not just of faith, but of power. Then there were the royal visits. When a pharaoh arrived at Thebes, perhaps for the Opet festival, every detail had to be perfect. Banners unfurled, streets swept, golden barges prepared for river procession. The statue of Amun was carried on sacred poles hidden behind veils as the people watched in hushed awe. The high priest walked beside the divine image, his role almost as exalted as that of the king himself. Imagine the pressure. Behind the gleaming surface's gold incense, carved prayers was a constant performance. The act of being pure, of appearing serene. Yet it was a performance threaded with deep belief. The gods, it was said, walked among them in spirit, if not in flesh. Their favor meant rain, harvest, life. Their anger meant disease, drought, and defeat. In private, priests rested in modest quarters, studied old scrolls by flickering oil lamps, or debated celestial alignments late into the night. Some, weary with age, dreamed of retiring to a quiet village along the Nile, but many remained until the end, buried in tombs of their own, modest or grand, depending on their favor and fortune. And so, the rhythm of their lives continued, chant in silence, light in shadow, power in service. Thebes was a place of beauty and burden, where devotion to the divine was both sacred calling and constant weight. And now, let the past settle like dust on the wind. You've walked the blistering quarries of Giza, where men heaved and hauled under the eye of the sun. You've stood in the presence of Hatshepsut, the forgotten king in her temple of terraces and light. You've crept through the broken corridors of hidden tombs, where secrets slumber in dry silence. And you've wandered the hushed halls of Thebes, where priests whispered prayers to gods that shaped the stars. It's remarkable, isn't it? How much was built from so little. From desert and river, from sand and sweat, from dreams of immortality. But now the hammers have gone silent. The torchlight has dimmed. The gold leaf has flaked away from ancient murals, and the once living stone seems content to slumber. The people of this long-vanished world lived in rhythms that would seem strange to us now, governed by flooding rivers, sacred calendars, and the divine will of unseen powers. Their struggles were different, yet in some quiet way, familiar. They toiled to provide, to serve, to be remembered. They honored their dead. They worried about droughts. They hoped for fairness. They told stories to explain the stars. And despite the greatness they built, the pyramids, the laws, the temples, it was their ordinary moments that endure. A scribe brushing sand from his tablet, a mason pausing to wipe his brow, a priest hesitating before the altar. All these quiet fragments, like grains in the desert, make up the story we now tell. So now, as your thoughts drift like a bark on the Nile, you may leave this ancient world behind. You don't have to worry about the laborer's heat or the priest's perfection. You don't need to sleep on the stone floor of a dormitory or rise to light the altar flame before dawn. You're safe now. You're here, and the weight of empire no longer rests on your shoulders. Let the soft hush of history soothe you. Let the memory of stone and starlight settle into stillness. Let the world of the pharaoh's golden, brutal, beautiful fade gently into dreams.
Good night.